It began with laughter, the kind that rolls up from the gut and echoes across metal and mud. For the German tank crews of 1944, laughter was a luxury. In the lulls between battles, in the cramped, oil-scented interiors of their Tigers, it became ritual. There was something almost theatrical about it. A young loader, Fritz, brushing dust from his tunic. The seasoned commander, Oberfeldwebel Dietrich, lighting a cigarette with a steady hand. The rest of the crew clustered around, grinning as they swapped stories from the last engagement. Their confidence was hard-earned. The Tiger was the king of the battlefield, its thick armor and monstrous 88mm gun inspiring awe and dread wherever it rolled. They had grown accustomed to the fear they inspired, to the whispered rumors among Allied troops, the nervous glances when a Tiger's silhouette crested the hedgerows. They wore that fear like a medal. Yet among the German crews, a particular joke had taken root. A joke with teeth. It centered on the Sherman, the Allies' workhorse, and the subject of endless German mockery. They called it the Tommy cooker, for its tendency to burst into flames when hit. They called it the Ronson, after the lighter that lights every time. The Shermans, so the stories went, were no match for German steel. "If you see a Sherman," quipped one gunner, "wait until it gets close enough to hit, then knock it out. If it's a Firefly, you might as well laugh while you load." And always the laughter followed, dry, knowing, a little too loud. For them, the battlefield was a stage, and the Tiger was the star. The morning of June 13, 1944, dawned like any other in the Bocage country of Normandy. Mist clung to the fields, and the hedgerows loomed like ancient walls, thick with secrets. Dietrich's crew prepared for another day of hunting. They checked the breech, oiled the traverse, loaded ammunition, each movement practiced and precise. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery blended with birdsong. Fritz, barely 19, tossed a crust of bread in the air and caught it in his mouth, drawing a fresh round of applause. "Another day, another dozen Shermans," he declared. The laughter, this time, was almost raucous, but beneath the bravado there was tension. Unspoken, electric. Reports had filtered through about a new threat among the Allied ranks. A British tank, with a gun that could, in theory, penetrate even the mighty Tiger at long range. The Firefly, they called it. But, in these early days, the name was little more than a rumor. A ghost story told to restless crews. Dietrich snorted at the idea. "They bolt a bigger gun on a Sherman and think it changes the world?" He shook his head, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Let them try." Across the lines, British crews moved with quieter determination. They had no luxury of laughter. For weeks, they had watched friends fall, tanks burning, men scrambling from hatches, the sky flickering orange with defeat. In whispered moments, they spoke of vengeance and of hope, a hope pinned on a single weapon, hastily improvised and barely tested in battle. The Sherman Firefly was their secret ace, its long 17-pounder gun a promise of redemption. Yet in this hour, that promise remained unfulfilled. Back in the Tiger, the crew rolled forward, treads grinding through wet earth. The inside of the tank was stifling, every surface humming with nervous energy. Dietrich called out over the intercom, "Keep your eyes open. The British are desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." Fritz answered with a lazy salute, already composing his next joke. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. In the field ahead, movement flickered. Shadow, light, and something more. A flash of olive drab. Dietrich squinted through the periscope. "Sherman," he said, and the word was almost a punchline. The gunner, Hans, lined up the shot, easy as breathing. The loader grinned. Should I even bother to load a second round? But as the crosshairs settled, something felt off. A sliver of doubt worming its way through the laughter. The silhouette was different. The barrel, longer than it should have been. Dietrich hesitated. a heartbeat too long. On the British side, inside the cramped, muddy hull of the Firefly, Lieutenant Alan Carr could see the Tiger. His hands trembled on the controls, sweat stinging his eyes. "Steady," he whispered to his gunner. "We get one shot at this." Every muscle in the crew's bodies was wound tight, every nerve waiting for release. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and still they moved forward. Dietrich's laughter faltered as he barked, "Fire!" The Tiger's 80-meter thundered. The shells screamed across the field, missing by inches. At that same instant, the Firefly's gun spoke, a sharp, defiant crack that seemed to split the world. The laughter died on Dietrich's lips. In that frozen moment, a new reality dawned, one that would haunt German tankers from Normandy to the Rhine. The myth of the Tiger, invincible and unchallenged, had met its match. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would change the fate of armored warfare and leave no one laughing. Even before it appeared on the battlefields of Western Europe. The Tiger tank's legend had already begun to grow, fueled by whispers among Allied scouts and the almost reverent silence that fell over the German ranks whenever the word Tiger was spoken. It was a legend forged not only from steel and fire, but from fear itself. In the muddy barracks of England and the blasted forests of the Eastern Front, the Tiger was a monster half seen and half imagined, a juggernaut that had torn through Russian armor at Leningrad and Kursk, that had left behind a graveyard of shattered T-34s and burned-out KVs. To the men who fought against it, it was less a machine than a force of nature. What made the Tiger so terrifying was not just its engineering, but its aura. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger. I was immense, a looming fortress of nearly 60 tons, with thick, sloped armor that could shrug off most Allied rounds like pebbles tossed against a barn door. Its main gun, the infamous 88mm Ko-36, was a weapon that seemed to belong more to a battleship than a land vehicle. And the stories told about its accuracy, its reach, its unerring ability to destroy anything it faced grew with every retelling. A single Tiger, they said, could hold up an entire battalion. Whole Allied columns would grind to a halt at the rumor of one prowling nearby. The Germans themselves cultivated the myth. And why not? In a war of nerves, fear was as valuable as any tank shell. German propaganda painted the Tiger as the ultimate predator, the Panzerkönig, king of tanks. "With the Tiger," wrote one Wehrmacht officer, "we are untouchable. The enemy fires, and the shells bounce harmlessly from our armor. When we fire, they burn." German crews took pride in their assignment. To be chosen for a Tiger unit was a badge of honor, reserved for the best and the boldest. But the Tiger's myth was just as powerful on the other side. Allied tankers, many of them barely out of school, grew cold at the thought of meeting one in battle. Letters sent home from Normandy and Italy are full of the same refrain: "Pray I never meet a Tiger." In briefings, officers tried to steel their men with statistics and tactics, but even the bravest among them knew the odds. A Canadian Sherman driver remembered, "We were told not to waste our shells if we saw a Tiger from the front. Aim for the tracks," they said. "Try to blind it." But inside, we all knew. The first shot would decide everything, and it wouldn't be ours. On the ground, the Tiger's impact was immediate and brutal. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, entire Allied platoons melted away at the sight of one looming above the fields, its turret swiveling with slow, mechanical indifference. "It was like facing a god," recalled a British infantryman. "You could see the shells sparking off its hide, but it just kept coming." The crack of the 80mm gun became the sound of doom, the last thing many a crewman ever heard. Even when outnumbered, Tiger crews often fought with absolute confidence. At Villers-Bocage, one Tiger commanded by Michael Whitman, who would become a living legend in his own right, destroyed dozens of British vehicles in a single morning, single-handedly stalling an entire armored advance. Stories like these, carried home and spread by word of mouth, cemented the Tiger's reputation as unbeatable. Of course, the myth was never the whole story. The Tiger was as much a burden as a blessing, its engine prone to overheating, its treads vulnerable to mines, its size making it an easy target for aircraft and artillery. Maintenance was a nightmare, and breakdowns claimed more Tigers than enemy fire. But to the Allied soldiers who faced them, such flaws were small comfort. Every Allied force developed its own way of coping with the Tiger's shadow. Some tankers relied on speed and luck, darting in and out of the hedgerows, hoping to catch the Tiger from the side or rear. Others placed their faith in artillery or air support, praying for a well-timed typhoon or thunderbolt to swoop down and even the odds. Infantrymen spoke in hushed tones of the giant cats, as if mentioning the name too loudly would summon one into existence. And all the while, commanders pored over reports and blueprints, desperate for an answer to the Tiger's reign. Behind the lines, Allied intelligence teams worked late into the night, analyzing fragments of armor and captured shells, searching for weaknesses, for any scrap of hope. The Tiger can be beaten, they told themselves, if we can only find the right weapon. Rumors spread of new shells, of secret weapons, of British engineers working feverishly in sheds and factories from London to Liverpool. In quiet moments, tankers shared the whispers. They're fitting a new gun to the Sherman, someone would say. They call it a Firefly, supposed to punch through a Tiger from half a mile away. The laughter that greeted these tales was nervous, forced, a joke to keep fear at bay. But across the channel, the rumor was becoming reality. In workshops thick with the smell of oil and steel, British engineers wrestled with a challenge many had called impossible: shoehorning the fearsome 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the narrow hull of a Sherman. Every step was a gamble, every prototype a prayer. If it worked, it could change the balance overnight. For the men who still faced the Tiger in battle, this hope remained distant, flickering, a story for another day. But change was coming. The first Fireflies were already rolling off the line, their long barrels gleaming in the summer sun. They were untested, unproven, but within weeks they would write their own legend. The Germans still believed in their invincibility. Their laughter still echoed across the fields of France. But the Allies were working on a secret, a weapon that would silence the Tiger's roar and turn the laughter to something else entirely. They called themselves the crew of the coffin. It was a joke, meant to sound brave, but in the heartbeats before dawn, it felt too close to the truth. The men of Sherman crews, Americans, British, Canadians, Poles, woke each morning with the same dread. The Tiger was out there, somewhere, beyond the curtain of mist and the hedgerows thick with June leaves. An enemy tank might be waiting. A tank they'd been told, again and again, they could not beat from the front. It wasn't just the Tigers. The whole armored fist of the Wehrmacht seemed to loom over them, casting a shadow that stretched from the beaches of Normandy to the shattered villages inland. But it was the Tiger, always the Tiger, that haunted their dreams. The Shermans were fast, their engines eager, but they were thin-skinned and high-sided, as if designed to be seen and shot at. The Tommy Cooker, the Germans sneered, a tank that went up in flames with a single well-placed hit, turning its crew into desperate, scrambling silhouettes against walls of fire. Private James Jimmy Wallace, a British gunner, kept a folded letter from his mother tucked into the breast pocket of his overalls. On the morning before his first engagement, he scribbled a reply in shaking pencil. "If you see Mr. Churchill, tell him to send us something thicker than tin. Yesterday, Davies's tank took a hit from one of their 88s. It burned like a bonfire. We couldn't get him out. The smell stays with you. Don't tell Dad. I don't want him worrying. Tell little Lizzie I miss her. American tankers, too, shared the same fear. Sergeant Frank Malone, 2nd Armored Division, described the first time he faced a tiger. The shells just bounced off. We tried to flank it, but it cut us to pieces. You can't fight something you can't hurt. He sent his own letter home, trying to sound strong for his wife and boy. We do our best with what we've got. Maybe I'll get lucky and bring one of those tigers down, just once. But don't count on it. For every story of defiance, there were 10 more of loss. The battlefield was littered with the broken hulks of Shermans, their hulls torn open, tracks twisted, blackened by fire. Crews lived with the knowledge that their odds of surviving a hit were slim. Lieutenant Arthur Hargrove, a Canadian commander, wrote, "The real test isn't when you go into battle. It's when you see your friends burn, and you have to keep moving forward, pretending you're made of iron." Yet it wasn't all fear. There was, stubbornly, a kind of hope, a refusal to give in to despair, no matter how many tanks the Germans knocked out. The mechanics worked miracles in the field, patching up battered Shermans with sheet metal, scavenged parts, even fence posts. The gunners trained and retrained, learning to aim for tracks and vision slits, to get close enough for a shot at the tiger's flanks, even if it meant risking everything. They joked about their chances, made bets on who would live longest, carved names into their tanks: Lucky Penny, Dear John, Fury. There were moments of triumph, rare and precious. In one skirmish near Caen, a Polish Sherman crew disabled a tiger with a lucky shot to the rear sprocket, forcing its crew to bail out and flee. The British captain who watched it unfold later confessed, "We cheered, but part of me knew it was a miracle, not a plan." Miracles don't win wars. In the mess tents and the dim glow of lanterns, rumors spread of a solution, of British engineers back home tinkering with something new. Some men scoffed, saying it was just more wishful thinking. Others clung to the hope. Sergeant Malone wrote, "Heard a whisper about a new Sherman with a gun big enough to crack a tiger. I'll believe it when I see it. But damn, I'd give anything for a fighting chance." Back in the workshops of England, that desperate hope took shape in hands calloused from work, and minds sharpened by loss. Engineers sweated over blueprints, cut steel with trembling fingers, argued late into the night. Could the Sherman carry a bigger gun? Would it break under the recoil? The tankers at the front wrote home for news, hungry for any scrap of information. Each rumor became a lifeline, each whisper a prayer. Still, for most, every day was a gamble. Each time a Sherman rolled out past the hedgerows, its crew knew the odds. Private Wallace finished his last letter with a line he never sent. "If we don't make it, know that we tried. We did our best. Maybe tomorrow, someone will find a way." In that gray, uncertain summer, fear was a constant companion. But it was never the whole story. Alongside it ran something else: stubbornness, resilience, the kind of hope that refuses to die even as the world burns around it. And somewhere behind the front, far from the shell fire and the ruined villages, a handful of engineers were racing against time. They had a plan. It was desperate, untested, and risky. But if it worked, it might just give the Allies the weapon they needed to turn the war and the laughter upside down. It was a war fought not just in trenches and fields, but in drafting rooms and machine shops, against the tyranny of numbers and the cold resistance of steel. For the British, the quest to arm their soldiers with a tank that could face the tiger was a race against despair. And for every man at the front praying for a miracle, there was another back home trying to forge one out of stubbornness and sleepless nights. At the heart of the effort stood the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. It was a marvel, sleek, long-barreled, and capable of punching through German armor at astonishing ranges. On paper, it could knock out a tiger at over 1,000 yards. But paper was not the battlefield, and the 17-pounder was designed for towed artillery, not for the cramped, thin-skinned Sherman. It was simply too big, too unwieldy, too powerful, too British for an American hull. At first, even the suggestion seemed a fantasy. But a handful of Vickers engineers, their hands scarred from endless prototypes, refused to give up. There was Dr. Charles Ellis, always with a notebook jammed in his coat pocket, sketching wild solutions in the margins. There was George Witheridge, a veteran tanker turned engineer after being wounded in North Africa, whose gruff humor hid a relentless drive. They haunted the sheds and test grounds at Lulworth and Chertsey, arguing deep into the night, each setback fueling another round of furious invention. Opposition was everywhere. The generals were cautious. Some, like Major General Percy Hobart, himself a visionary, cheered them on from the sidelines. But most of the top brass were skeptical. "We need more tanks, not cleverer ones," one staff officer insisted. "Besides, the Americans won't thank us for tinkering with their design." There were supply issues, political arguments, endless paperwork. The Ministry of Supply sent memos by the dozen. The Americans, wary of British modifications, pushed back gently but firmly. The Sherman worked. Why risk it all on a long shot? But the need was urgent. Reports from Normandy grew grimmer with every passing week. More Shermans burned. More letters home never found their recipients. "We have no choice," Ellis wrote in a memo that would later be found stained with oil. "If we do not act, our men will die in vain. The Tiger must be beaten." So the team pressed on. They tore open the Sherman's turret, cursing the cramped space, the unwelcome surprises of American engineering. The recoil of the 17-pounder was so great that it threatened to tear the turret apart. The gun breech was enormous, so large they had to carve out sections of the back wall and fit a new, odd-shaped hatch for the loader. The radio had nowhere to go, until Witheridge suggested mounting it in a box welded to the rear of the turret. "If the tankers complain, tell them to blame me," he grinned. The first prototype looked absurd, almost cartoonish. The gun barrel jutted out like a spear, heavy and menacing. The inside was so cramped that the loader could barely move, forced to feed rounds at awkward angles. On its first live-fire test, the recoil nearly broke the turret ring. A second test was even worse. The gun jammed, and the hatch stuck, trapping the crew for an hour. Engineers shook their heads. Some said it couldn't be done, but defeat was not an option. Each setback drew a new solution. Lighter gun mantlets, reinforced trunnions, clever bracing inside the turret ring. They shaved every spare inch off the breech, redesigned the recoil system, scavenged parts from scrapped tanks. At night, the engineers would walk back to their billets, shoes caked with mud and metal shavings, dreams filled with the faces of young men who would trust their lives to their work. Outside, in the rain-slicked yards, mechanics did the impossible, too. Men like Sergeant Arthur "Mac" McPherson, a Glaswegian with grease under his nails and a sharp tongue, worked 20-hour days coaxing engines back to life and teaching green boys how to swap out a transmission in the dark. "We're all mad here," Mac would say, "but I'd rather be mad than dead." The political battles raged just as fiercely. Commanders demanded more tests, more guarantees. Supply officers wrangled over spare parts and ammunition. The Americans sent a steady stream of polite protests. But something remarkable happened. News from the front grew ever more desperate, and even the doubters began to listen. Stories filtered back of Tiger tanks halting whole advances, of young men turned to ash. "If this bloody contraption works," a senior officer conceded, "maybe we'll live to argue about it." The breakthrough came on a cold, damp morning in March 1944. The latest prototype, a battered Sherman, patched and painted in dull green, rolled onto the test range. Ellis, Witheridge, and a half-dozen mechanics watched in silence as the Firefly's long barrel settled on a distant hulk of captured German steel. The order was given. The gun fired, once, twice. Each time, The heavy shell punched clean through the armor, shattering the target and the last doubts in the minds of those who watched. They called it the Firefly, for the way the gun's muzzle flash split the darkness like lightning. Production ramped up, mechanics worked round the clock, and British crews lined up to train on the new tank. "It's ugly as sin," said one, running his hand along the gun barrel, "but I'll take it over the old pop gun any day." Skepticism still lingered, not just among Allied brass, but even among German intelligence. Reports of a Sherman with a big gun reached Wehrmacht headquarters, and most officers dismissed it as Allied propaganda. "No Sherman could ever penetrate a Tiger from range," declared one. "If they had such a weapon, we would know." The laughter continued. But in the hedgerows and villages of France, Fireflies began to roll off the landing craft. They joined the columns moving inland, their crews nervous but determined. The Germans would soon learn that the war had changed, and that their laughter would not last forever. The moment of truth was coming. Somewhere ahead, the first Sherman Firefly would meet a Tiger in battle. What happened next would send shock waves across both armies and mark the beginning of the end for the Tiger's myth. They called it the New Hope, but hope in Normandy was a fragile thing. When the first Fireflies arrived at the front, battered by sea salt and rain, their crews eyed them with a mixture of pride and wariness. The barrel was impossibly long, so long that drivers worried it would catch on the hedgerows or betray their position before they ever got off a shot. In the shadow of the Tiger's myth, even a miracle felt unsteady on its feet. Training was hurried, sometimes little more than a quick walk-through between incoming mortar rounds. Lieutenant Alan Carr, among the first to command a Firefly, remembered the feeling of climbing inside. Everything felt tighter, more dangerous. The loader's elbow was always in your ribs, and that new radio box took up half the room. But we all kept glancing at that barrel, hoping it could do what they promised. The first missions were a mix of anticipation and dread. Fireflies were parceled out to British and Commonwealth armored regiments, often 1 or 2 per troop. A special ace held back until needed most. The orders were clear. When the Tigers appeared, the Firefly would move to the front. "Let the Jerrys see what we can do," one officer joked, though his smile was thin. But the battlefield was an unforgiving teacher. In the thick Bocage country, vision was measured in meters, not miles. The long gun was both a blessing and a curse, swinging through brush and branches, sometimes revealing the tank before it could find a target. Crews wrestled with unfamiliar mechanisms, jamming shells into the heavy breech at odd angles, sweating in the claustrophobic heat. More than once, the gun stuck, refusing to cycle for a second shot. On a gray June morning outside Villers-Bocage, Lieutenant Carr's Firefly joined an ambush. The plan was simple: wait for German armor, let them roll into the kill zone, then open fire at close range. The tension inside the tank was electric. The loader's hands shook as he cradled the first 17-pounder round. Carr's mouth was dry. At the appointed hour, the first Tiger appeared. Massive, implacable, sunlight glinting off its hull. Carr gave the order. The Firefly's gun barked, the shell streaking through the morning haze, and missed. The gunner cursed, realigning for a second shot. But the Tiger's turret was already turning. In seconds, the air was torn by the thunder of the 88. The Firefly shuddered as dirt and metal rained down around it. The Tigers rolled on, unscathed. The ambush had failed. Such setbacks became stories of their own. In the early weeks, Fireflies struggled as much with themselves as with the enemy. Reports filtered back to headquarters. Guns jamming, radios shorting out, loaders unable to keep up the rate of fire. "We have the weapon," one frustrated officer wrote, "but not yet the mastery." Some crews wondered if it was just another experiment, doomed to end in the mud like so many before. Yet even in disappointment, there were glimmers of something more. In the heat of battle, crews learned to adapt. Mechanics crawled over tanks at midnight, tweaking recoil systems and jury-rigging fixes. Gun crews drilled until their arms ached, rehearsing every movement by touch in the dark. And in every failed ambush, every near miss, a lesson was learned. How to hide the barrel, how to use the bocage as cover, how to wait for the perfect shot. Rumors spread quickly, both of success and disaster. In one skirmish, a Firefly managed to disable a Panzer IV at long range, stunning the German crew and drawing cheers from its squadron. But such victories were rare, and the real test, the one that would silence the doubters, had not yet come. For the men inside the Firefly, the pressure mounted. They felt the eyes of the regiment on them, the hopes of comrades pinned to a single round of high-velocity steel. "You didn't want to be the first to fail," Lieutenant Carr later wrote. But the only thing worse was to never get the chance to try. At night, in the lull between barrages, Firefly crews swapped stories with their Sherman brothers, each tale growing taller by the hour. Someone claimed to have seen a tiger back away from a Firefly, but no one could confirm it. Most agreed that until a tiger burned, the myth remained. Still, something was changing, subtle but undeniable. The Germans had begun to notice the longer barrels, to whisper about special Shermans. Intelligence reports noted a new threat, but no one could say for sure what it was capable of. In German briefings, officers dismissed the rumors with a shrug, but a shadow of doubt crept in. "If they had a tank that could kill a tiger," one panzer commander scoffed, "we would know by now." But no one on either side could predict what would happen next. The Firefly's true test, a duel that would echo far beyond the fields of Normandy, was coming. And when it arrived, it would change the war forever. There are moments in history when the balance tilts, not gradually, but with the abruptness of a thunderclap, as if the whole world draws in its breath and exhales in a new direction. For the Allies and their beleaguered tank crews, that moment came amid the shattered streets and tangled hedgerows of Normandy. On days when the Tigers, kings of the battlefield, were finally brought low. The village of Villers-Bocage became the stage for one of the war's most storied duels. The place was small, a few stone houses, a cafe with blown-out windows, hedgerows thick as fortress walls. German Tigers, led by the already legendary Michael Wittmann, had moved in to block the British advance after D-Day. In the days before, Wittmann's Tiger had destroyed dozens of British vehicles in a matter of minutes, stalling the entire 7th Armored Division and striking fear into the hearts of every Allied crew within earshot of a radio. On June 13, 1944, the British made their move. Among their number was a Firefly, commanded by Sergeant Joe Ekins, a young man with barely any combat experience, but a clear head and steady hands. As dawn broke, British tanks crept into Villers-Bocage, only to be ambushed by Wittmann and his Tigers. For hours, the battle swung on a knife edge, Shermans burning in the narrow streets, Tigers stalking their prey with impunity. But the myth of invincibility cracked that day. From a concealed position outside the village, Ekins watched the chaos through the Firefly's scope. Amid the smoke, the silhouette of a tiger loomed, a beast every man in the tank had learned to fear. Ekins breathed out, steadying himself, and gave the order to fire. The 17-pounder roared, a flash of light in the gloom. The first shot slammed into the tiger's hull. The second found its mark, and, in an instant, the tiger was no more. Flames leapt skyward. For the first time, the king of tanks had been killed at range by a Sherman, by a Firefly. Radio chatter erupted up and down the line. "Tiger knocked out by Sherman. Repeat, Tiger knocked out by Sherman." The message ricocheted from tank to tank, disbelief warring with hope. Some men cheered. Others simply stared, unable to process what they had witnessed. The German crews, hearing the news over their own radios, were stunned. Impossible! Someone barked, his voice thin with shock. The English have a new weapon. We are not safe. It wasn't just Villers-Bocage. Across Normandy, as the hedgerow battles ground on, more fireflies crept into ambush positions. The crews, growing more confident with each engagement, learned to use their long gun barrels to their advantage. They hid in the shadows, in barns and orchards, waiting for the telltale silhouette of a tiger or panther to appear against the skyline. One Canadian Firefly commander, Captain Sidney Radley Walters, recalled lying in wait on a ridge as the sun set. He and his crew barely dared to breathe. We waited for hours, watching the crossroads. When the tiger finally appeared, he looked invincible, but we fired first. The shell punched through his side. He stopped dead. We watched the crew bail out, running for cover. In that moment, we knew the myth was broken. There were setbacks and failures, of course. The Germans were no fools. Wittmann and other tank aces adapted, learning to hunt the fireflies, to stay out of open fields where the British gun could pick them off at a distance. But the tide had turned. The fear was now mutual. German radio intercepts tell a new story. Tank commanders urging caution, warning of Shermans with long barrels that could kill from afar. Achtung! Sherman with long gun, keep to cover, came the crackling orders. German crews, once so confident, now moved with wary eyes, always searching for the firefly's glint among the hedgerows. Eyewitness accounts capture the change in mood. Lieutenant Alan Carr, whose Firefly had failed in its first engagement, found himself part of a small ambush on the road to Caen. This time, they were ready. The Firefly lay still, its gun trained on a crossroads. A tiger appeared, arrogant and alone. Carr's gunner, sweat pouring down his brow, waited for the perfect shot. The 17-pounder spat fire. The tiger shuddered, then erupted in a fountain of flame. "We'd done it," Carr wrote in his journal. The tiger was gone, and we were still alive. For the first time, I felt the fear had shifted. The effect rippled out. In mess tents and briefing rooms, Allied morale surged. Crews shared tales of Firefly kills with pride and relief. And the old jokes about Tommy cookers were replaced with new respect. Even the German prisoners, when captured, sometimes asked in hushed voices about the Sherman with the long barrel. "Did you use the Firefly?" they would ask, their confidence replaced by anxiety. Perhaps no story spread faster than the tale of Sergeant Joe Ekins and his duel with Wittmann's tigers. The myth grew by the day. One Firefly, 3 tigers destroyed, the unbeatable ace stopped by an ordinary British gunner. The truth, as always, was muddied by the fog of war, but the impact was undeniable. The tiger, once a monster, had been slain by something thought impossible. For the German High Command, the news was both stunning and deeply troubling. Reports from the field demanded answers. How had the British managed to fit such a powerful gun to the Sherman? Why had intelligence failed to anticipate it? Orders were issued to prioritize the destruction of fireflies wherever found. "Target the long barrels," came the directive. But it was too late. The Allies had found their weapon, and the psychological balance had shifted. Across the lines, Allied tankers still paid a steep price. The Firefly was not invulnerable. Many were lost, their crews sharing the fate of their Sherman brethren. But now, when a Firefly went into battle, hope rode with it. Every time a tiger burned, every time a panther was stopped dead in its tracks, another crack appeared in the myth of German invincibility. The radios hummed with new energy. "If you see a long barrel," one Sherman commander advised over the net, "let him take the shot. That's our best chance." And so, the tactics changed. Fireflies took the lead in ambushes, their crews bearing the double-edged sword of expectation. The Germans, once hunters, found themselves hunted. Personal accounts from inside the tanks revealed the emotional toll. Some crews were giddy with triumph, others haunted by what they had survived. Private Wallace, who had once written home about his fear, now found himself at the forefront of the armored advance. He saw the terror in German eyes as the Firefly opened fire. He felt the weight of his new role, not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of something greater. "We're not just fighting tanks anymore," he wrote. "We're fighting fear itself." In the fields of Normandy, in the villages and crossroads where so many had fallen, the war was far from over. The Tigers would fight on, deadly as ever. But now, whenever a German crew spotted a Sherman with a long barrel, they hesitated. The laughter was gone, replaced by a new, sharper caution. Suddenly, the hunters became the hunted. And as the sun set over the battered fields, the crews of both sides knew the old world was gone. The Firefly had changed everything. But behind every burning tank, every shattered myth, were men. Fearful, brave, sometimes lucky, sometimes doomed. Their stories and the price they paid were just beginning to be told. Inside the metal shell of a Sherman Firefly, the world shrank to a clattering, sweat-soaked cage. Every bolt, every lever, every trembling voice over the intercom became the center of the universe. For Gunner Tom Bishop, the fear was always there, simmering beneath a thin veneer of banter. His diary, scrawled in pencil on whatever scraps he could find, captured the tension and odd intimacy of life inside the turret. June 16, 1944. The heat's stifling. Loader Smith keeps cracking jokes about the size of the new gun, says it makes the tank look like a cricket bat with tracks. Can't see much out the sight. We're all waiting. I can hear my own heart. Or maybe it's the engine. Trying not to think about tigers, but every time I close my eyes, I see that silhouette in the smoke. Between missions, the crew snatched moments of camaraderie, huddled over mugs of tea that tasted of metal and fear. The loader, Smith, had a way of telling stories that made even the most green recruit laugh. The driver, Jennings, swore he could steer the Firefly by sound alone, navigating the hedgerows by the pitch of the engine and the rattle of loose bolts. Their commander, Lieutenant Alan Carr, bore the pressure with a steady calm that was almost contagious. "If I show nerves," he confided to Bishop one night, "the crew will fall apart. So I tell them we're the best, even when I'm not sure I believe it." It was in the close confines that their bonds were forged. In battle, each man depended utterly on the others. The loader's speed, the gunner's aim, the driver's reflexes, the commander's orders. When the shells fell and the tigers appeared, there was no room for doubt. "Trust the man next to you," Bishop wrote, "or you're done for." Across the line, in a German Tiger, Captain Erich Stein wrestled with a different set of fears. His war diary, recovered after the battle, revealed the slow erosion of certainty. "The English are using a new Sherman. It has a long gun. Our men call it the Langrohr. Today, 2 of our panzers were lost at a range we thought impossible. We were not supposed to be vulnerable. Some of the men are shaken. I try to project confidence, but inside I wonder, how long can the Tiger remain king?" After-action reports from both sides spoke of confusion and chaos. Bishop recalled one ambush outside Caen. "We lay in wait for hours. I nearly fell asleep at the gun. Then suddenly the radio crackled. Target in sight. I lined up the shot, sweat running down my back. I squeezed the trigger. The whole tank jumped. Felt like I'd fired a cannon in a broom closet. Saw the Tiger stop dead, smoke pouring from the hatch. I'll never forget that feeling. Elation, then dread. We waited for the return fire, but nothing came. Only silence, and then Smith started to laugh, wild and shaky. Sometimes, the moments were almost absurd. On a rainy morning, their Firefly got stuck in the mud. Jennings tried to rock them free, cursing the bloody English weather. Smith, ever the joker, suggested they use the long barrel as a lever. Even in war, the ridiculous intruded. "I think that's what kept us sane," Carr reflected years later. "You find reasons to laugh, or you go mad. but the cost was never far away. After every skirmish, the crew counted heads, sometimes finding an empty bunk in the billet, a helmet left behind. Bishop's diary grew darker as the days went by. "Lost sea company today?" Tiger hit them from the woods. Only 2 crawled out. "We raised a tin of bully beef in their honor, then went back to our tank. It's never enough." The Germans, too, faced mounting losses. Captain Stein described the toll in quiet resignation. "I have lost good men. The new Shermans are deadly if they shoot first. I tell my crew to keep moving, to stay in cover. But the pressure is immense. Some whisper that the war is changing, that our luck is running out." Amidst tragedy, moments of humanity shone through. During a lull, the crews exchanged souvenirs through the ruins. German rations for British cigarettes, a captured Luger traded for a can of condensed milk. "We're all just trying to survive," Bishop wrote. "Sometimes it feels like we have more in common with them than with the generals miles behind the line." As the campaign ground on, stories spread of legendary duels, single tanks facing off, crews pitting wits and nerve against fate. The men inside the turrets became both hunters and hunted, locked in a contest that was part skill, part luck, and all courage. Every time Bishop sighted a tiger, he felt the weight of expectation. His own, his crew's, perhaps even the nation's, and always, behind every engagement, the knowledge that one shot could change everything. In the next fight, a Firefly would face a tiger in open country. No hedgerows, no shadows, just man, machine, and the narrowest margin between life and death. Fate, in Normandy, was about to be decided by those with the nerve to pull the trigger first. War, for all its chaos, often becomes a contest of adaptation, a game of wits where survival favors the quickest learners. Once the Firefly's bite became known, its crews realized brute force alone would not be enough. The Germans still had the advantage in armor, optics, and experience. If the Firefly was to become the tiger's nemesis, it would take more than a bigger gun. It would require cunning, invention, and a willingness to take risks at the very edge of disaster. Camouflage became an art form, not just a routine. In the hedgerows and fields of Normandy, British and Commonwealth tankers used every scrap of foliage, every brush stroke of paint, to break up the silhouette of their machines. Crews draped their Fireflies in branches, burlap, and mud, blending into the patchwork landscape until only the sharpest eye could spot them. They learned to park in the shadows of ruined barns or behind stone walls, with just the barrel poking out, a snake in the grass, waiting to strike. But camouflage alone wasn't enough. The Firefly's long gun barrel, meant to be its greatest asset, was also a curse. It made the tank instantly recognizable to experienced German observers. The solution was ingenious. Some crews painted the front 2/3 of the barrel with a wavy stripe of dark paint, creating the illusion, at a glance, that it was a standard, shorter Sherman gun. The rest of the tank received extra mud and dust, breaking up its profile. In the chaos of battle, that split second of hesitation might be all the Firefly needed. Hull down, firing quickly became gospel. The concept was simple. Use the terrain so that only the turret and, crucially, the gun was exposed to the enemy. Everything else, especially the vulnerable lower hull, stayed hidden behind a rise or embankment. Firefly commanders became masters of the countryside, choosing their ground with the care of chess players. Lieutenant Carr drilled his crew mercilessly in finding and holding these positions. "If they see more than your barrel, you're already dead," he'd say. It was the difference between becoming a legend and becoming a statistic. Then came shoot and scoot, a tactic that turned the battlefield into a deadly game of hide-and-seek. Firefly crews knew they had, at most, 1 or 2 shots before German eyes and German guns found them. As soon as the 17-pounder roared, the tank would reverse at full throttle, vanishing into a dip or back behind cover. The loader scrambled to feed in another round, the commander searching for a new angle. It was exhausting, nerve-shredding work, but it worked. Time and again, Tigers would return fire at the wrong spot, sending shells into empty hedgerows or already abandoned hulls. Firefly teams became notorious for their decoy tactics. Sometimes a standard Sherman would drive openly, drawing the Tiger's attention and even a shot, while the Firefly waited concealed, poised to ambush as the German tank revealed its flank. On other occasions, two Fireflies would work together, one baiting a Tiger into turning its turret, the other striking from a new angle. Communication and trust were everything. "We worked in pairs like wolves," remembered Bishop. "One to draw blood, one to finish the job." There were other, subtler tricks as well. Some crews used captured German smoke grenades to mask their movements. Others rigged spare wheels or sandbags to their tanks, hoping to confuse rangefinders or absorb a glancing blow. In the evening gloom, Fireflies sometimes shut down their engines and lay in wait, listening for the grinding approach of enemy armor. Patience, more than steel, became their sharpest weapon. The Germans soon realized the rules had changed. Radio intercepts from July and August 1944 captured the growing anxiety. "Achtung! Shermans with long guns active in sector. Proceed with caution." Tank commanders began to avoid obvious kill zones, preferring to fight at night or in poor visibility. Orders were issued to target the Fireflies first, but finding them amid the sea of Shermans was easier said than done. The psychological effect was profound. The same Germans who had once mocked the Tommy cookers now treated every Sherman with suspicion. Panzer crews reported phantom guns, shots coming from nowhere, tanks destroyed by unseen enemies. Panic spread through some units, leading to overcaution or outright retreat at the first sign of an ambush. The myth of the Tiger's invincibility, already cracked, began to shatter. Yet, for all their cleverness, Firefly crews never grew complacent. Each engagement was a test of nerves and skill, where a single misstep could mean death. The Tigers were still deadly, their crews skilled and tenacious. Every success was balanced by the memory of friends lost, tanks abandoned and burning in the hedgerows. But as weeks turned to months, a pattern emerged. Allied losses remained heavy, but the scales had shifted. For every Firefly knocked out, another Tiger was left burning in the field. The hunters and the hunted swapped places with dizzying speed. By late summer, German reports were filled with notes of alarm. The enemy's new tactics render our armor less effective. Recommend increased reconnaissance, change of formation, withdrawal from exposed positions. British tankers, once the butt of every joke, now held the advantage of surprise, initiative, and, increasingly, respect. But victory on the battlefield was never total. The Germans adapted with a speed that surprised even the most seasoned Firefly crews. New camouflage, counter-ambush drills, desperate tactics of their own. The duel was far from over. And as panic spread, so too did a new kind of fight. As cunning was met with cunning, and fear was replaced by a desperate will to survive. The war of tanks had become a war of minds, and for every trick, there was an answer waiting in the smoke. In the quiet corners of command tents and the smoke-choked interiors of Tiger tanks, the mood was changing. What had once been a war of certainty for German crews, a game they were sure to win, was now shot through with dread and confusion. The intercepted Allied messages, once dismissed as idle boasting, took on new urgency. Repeat, Tiger knocked out by Sherman at 800 meters. Enemy using long-barreled gun. Extreme caution advised. These words echoed through radio nets that, only weeks before, had carried jokes and swagger. Sergeant Carl Becker, a Tiger gunner who had survived Kursk and the winter on the Eastern Front, felt the shift as keenly as anyone. "We had always trusted our armor, our gun, our luck," he would later write in his battered diary. Now, each time we rolled out, someone would mutter about the Langrohr Sherman. Even our officers started telling us to keep to cover, to never assume we were safe. The fear was a slow poison, quiet but unmistakable. German tankers, who had once hunted in bold packs across the fields, now moved with a predator's caution. Every distant glint in a hedgerow might be a firefly, every broken wall a potential ambush. Radio intercepts painted a picture of increasing anxiety. Sherman, with long gun sighted, avoid open ground. Losses heavier than expected. Enemy using new tactics. Commanders urged changes in formation and discipline, and new orders from Berlin reached the front. Tanks were to be deployed in mutually supporting groups, never advancing without reconnaissance, always wary of the next unseen shot. The myth of Tiger invulnerability was unraveling fast. At first, some units denied the threat, convinced that any loss was a fluke or an error in judgment. But as the Firefly's kills mounted, each one a small catastrophe in itself, skepticism gave way to alarm. "Our Tiger destroyed at range by English Sherman," read one after-action report. "Armor penetrated, no survivors. Enemy gun far superior to previous intelligence estimates." For men who had known nothing but dominance, the sudden vulnerability was a bitter shock. Morale began to crack in subtle, insidious ways. Veterans found themselves second-guessing every decision. New recruits, fed on legends of German steel, confronted a reality far harsher than the stories they'd been told. Commanders struggled to maintain discipline and hope, even as casualties mounted and the enemy pressed harder. Some tankers grew fatalistic, resigned to their fate. Others responded with bursts of fury and courage, clinging to the hope that a well-placed ambush or a lucky shot could turn the tide back. But everywhere, the sense of security had vanished. In the words of Captain Erich Stein, whose Tiger had narrowly survived a Firefly ambush, "There is no safety now, no angle we can trust. The war has become a contest of nerves." German crews trained harder, studied new manuals, adopted fresh camouflage patterns and counter-ambush tactics. But the initiative was gone, the momentum lost. The change was felt not just in the ranks, but at the very top. Orders came down for new Panther tanks to reinforce the front, for the rapid development of even heavier weapons. But the response was desperate, not confident. The great cats of Germany, once symbols of invincibility, were now just another species fighting for survival. Yet even as German morale faltered, their resolve did not. If the Firefly had shattered illusions, it had also bred a new, grim determination. "We will not give up the field," Becker wrote, "even if every tank is burning around us." But as the fields of Normandy and the roads of France filled with wrecks and the acrid stench of loss, another truth emerged, one that would define the rest of the campaign. For every breakthrough, there was a cost. For every Tiger lost, a Firefly crew risked everything. For every German counterattack, Allied tankers braced for another harrowing duel. Now, both sides faced a new war, one where courage and sacrifice, not myth or machinery, would decide who survived the turning tide. In the heart of the storm, men became legends, or memories. The tank war in Normandy was a crucible where bravery and heartbreak lived side by side, where courage was measured not by victory, but by the will to climb back into a steel box after watching friends disappear in fire and smoke. Private Tom Bishop's diary, miraculously preserved after his Firefly was knocked out near Saint-Lambert, told of terror and brotherhood. "We lost Smith today. Shell hit the hull. Fire everywhere. He got the hatch open for me before the flames took him. I keep hearing his laugh, his bad jokes. Don't know how to write home about it." The words, shaky and cramped, captured what no after-action report could: the aching void left by each casualty. the silent weight in every glance between survivors. Across the lines, German Sergeant Karl Becker felt the same grief. In one brutal engagement, his Tiger was ambushed by a Firefly hidden behind a stone wall. The round tore through the armor, killing two of his closest friends. Becker crawled free, his ears ringing, his face smeared with blood and disbelief. Later, in a field hospital, he struggled to make sense of it all. "We were not supposed to die like this. I told my crew we were invincible. Now I see only empty bunks. I am alive, but it does not feel like victory." Bravery often came in small, quiet acts. A loader pulling his commander from a burning tank. A gunner refusing to bail out so he could cover his friend's escape. Lieutenant Alan Carr, wounded but alive after his Firefly took a direct hit, wrote to his wife, "I thought of you in those moments, and it gave me the strength to crawl out. If I ever come home, I will carry the memory of those who didn't. They were the bravest men I've known." His letter, stained and creased, was kept in a family box for decades. Grief, too, found its rituals. Some crews named their tanks after lost comrades. Others carved initials into battered armor plates, a silent memorial to those who had gone before. In the rare lulls between battles, the men shared stories of home, of love, of life before the war. They laughed louder, drank deeper, clung to the ordinary in the face of the extraordinary. Both Allied and German tankers coped with fear in their own ways. Some became fatalistic, living hour by hour, embracing dark humor as a shield against despair. Others hardened, growing cold and efficient, focusing on the next mission, the next repair, the next order. All of them carried scars, some visible, some hidden deep inside. Parents received telegrams and letters, some hopeful, others final. In England, a mother read the last words of her son, a Firefly commander. "Tell Dad I did my best. Don't let them forget us." In Germany, a wife mourned a husband who would never see the victory promised to him by propaganda. Grief paid no attention to uniforms or borders. The war left survivors with a burden that never truly lifted. Many tankers struggled with nightmares, memories that surfaced in the quiet years that followed. Some found solace in reunions, visiting battlefields now peaceful and green, searching for a sense of meaning among the ruins. Others could not bear to return. Yet, in all the heartbreak, a stubborn thread of hope endured. The men who fought in the Fireflies and the Tigers knew that their courage had changed the course of history. Their sacrifices pierced the myth of invincibility, proved that adaptation and valor could turn even the most desperate odds. The price was written in loss, but the legacy was victory. As the guns fell silent and the tanks rusted under summer rain, the stories of these crews began to spread, told by survivors, by their children, by a world hungry for understanding. The Firefly's long barrel came to symbolize not just a weapon, but a refusal to surrender, a promise that the underdog could triumph through grit and innovation. And so, as Normandy healed and the world moved on, the memory of those battles lived on, not only in history books, but in every act of courage that followed, every time someone stood against the odds and refused to back down. The true impact of the Firefly reached far beyond the shattered fields where men once fought and fell. When the dust settled over Normandy and the last echoes of artillery faded, the Sherman Firefly's legacy was already taking shape, etched into memory by those who witnessed its rise, and by the silent rows of tigers it had left behind. Its impact was felt not only in the fields of France, but in every armored doctrine, every blueprint, and every veteran's quiet reflection for decades to come. For the men who rode the Firefly into battle, its arrival was more than just a technical upgrade. It was a symbol of resilience and adaptation. Sergeant Tom Bishop, who had once doubted if any Sherman could ever stand up to a Tiger, later said in an interview, That long gun gave us more than firepower. It gave us a fighting chance. We started to believe the war wasn't just a matter of luck or numbers. Skill, training, and sheer determination could tilt the balance. D-Day itself had seen the first hints of this new resolve. As Allied forces broke through the Atlantic Wall, Fireflies landed in small but crucial numbers. Their presence was a secret weapon, hidden among the standard Shermans. The first Tigers to challenge the invasion were stunned by the sudden reach of British guns. In the days that followed, every enemy tank sighted brought with it the possibility of an ambush, a reversal, a myth overturned in seconds. Firefly crews grew bolder, their confidence rippling outward to every unit they supported. Historians later argued that the Firefly was a turning point not just technologically, but psychologically. Before its arrival, Allied tankers had endured the weight of the Tiger's legend, an invisible burden that often decided the outcome before a shot was fired. The Firefly cracked that spell. Dr. Rachel Harding, a military historian, wrote, "The Firefly didn't end German dominance overnight, but it broke the illusion that technology alone could win wars. It restored belief in ingenuity, teamwork, and courage under fire." In the months after Normandy, the lessons learned from Firefly tactics spread across the Allied armies. Hull-down fighting, rapid redeployment, and the pairing of specialized tanks for mutual support became doctrine, shaping not only the campaign in Europe, but the training of future generations. Tank crews shared tricks and stories across units, the legend of the Firefly growing with every retelling. Its success inspired new developments: bigger guns, better optics, faster radios, fueling an arms race that would stretch deep into the Cold War. Yet, for those who survived, the Firefly was also a vessel of memory, haunted by faces and voices lost in battle. Many veterans returned to Normandy years later, standing among the rusted hulks and wildflowers, searching for meaning. Some found comfort in the knowledge that their struggle had mattered, that the odds they faced and overcame had changed history's path. Others simply wept or stood silent, letting the wind carry their memories away. Innovation did not end with the Firefly. Its triumph proved that unconventional thinking and determined effort could reshape the battlefield, even when the enemy seemed unstoppable. Engineers who had once been dismissed as dreamers went on to shape post-war designs. Lessons from the Firefly influenced the Centurion, the Patton, and every modern tank built with adaptability and crew survival in mind. The story of the Firefly became a parable, told in military academies, shared in books and documentaries, a reminder of what could be achieved under pressure. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was not one of steel or tactics, but of humanity. For every tank, there was a crew. For every crew, a story of hope, terror, ingenuity, and loss. Firefly veterans, German and Allied alike, grew old with the memory of what they had faced and what they had overcome. As decades passed, the Firefly stood in museums and on village greens, not as a monument to war, but as a symbol of what ordinary men and women could achieve in extraordinary times. Historians and families alike came to see it not just as a machine, but as a vessel of stories, each one a lesson in courage, each one a reminder of the cost of conflict. For every tank, a human story. For every legend, a lesson, waiting to be learned, passed on, and never forgotten. The battle between the Sherman Firefly and the Tiger was never just about steel and firepower. It was, at its core, a clash of belief between the certainty of invincibility and the audacity to challenge it. From the laughter of overconfident crews to the silent determination of those who refused to surrender, this story reminds us how quickly the tides of war and life can turn. Fear is a shadow that can cripple or sharpen. The Tiger's legend grew from fear, spreading through Allied ranks and freezing men in its grip. But it was that very fear that sparked innovation, drove desperate acts of courage, and led to the birth of the Firefly. In the end, it was not brute strength alone that broke the tiger's hold on the battlefield, but the willingness to adapt, to take risks, and to believe that change was possible even when the odds seemed hopeless. The Firefly's journey stands as proof of what can happen when the underdog refuses to accept defeat. Its crews fought not only with new weapons, but with ingenuity, teamwork, and grit. They learned to see past the myth, to trust their own resourcefulness, and to find opportunity where others saw only danger. Their victories came at a cost, but they changed the course of the war, and the lives of those who survived to remember. For us, the lesson endures. In every field of endeavor, we face our own tigers, challenges that seem insurmountable, adversaries that loom larger than life. The story of the Firefly is a call to look past appearances, to question what we're told is impossible, and to find the courage to act even in the face of doubt and danger. As you imagine the view from inside a turret, sweat on your brow, hands trembling on the controls, ask yourself, would you have laughed with the confident, or been the first to see the truth? Would you wait for change, or help create it? The legends of history are not just about those who won, but those who dared. May we remember their courage and let it kindle our own.